So principle number one, and this is going to be a metaphor, but it's also something that we use in practice, is that in the game of poker, both players, once they see their cards and they see the action and the pot, there is a pot size that is appropriate for their hand. Just a basic example, if we're pre-flop and you have pocket aces, the pot size that is appropriate for your hand is as big as possible. Whereas if you have Deuce Seven offsuit, the pot size is 0. And various hands have things in between that are appropriate. Now, post-flop, the same applies, right? If I have pocket nines and I raised and the board came ace, ace, 8, and there's $20 in the pot, my hand wants a slightly bigger pot, but not a much bigger pot. If I have ace, king on ace, ace, 8, my hand wants a much bigger pot. And if I have 4, 5 on ace, ace, 8, the pot is already too big for my hand. Okay, so these are a few examples of what pot size does your hand want. When you really break down what the solver is doing, in essence, the way I view it is this. Each player has his cards, and those cards want to reach a certain pot size. And the solver is trying to navigate to that pot size without making it too obvious, because both players are doing this. Now, what do I mean by too obvious? Well, imagine I just went all in pre-flop with aces, and all in with kings, and with queens I raised to 20 big blinds, and with jacks I raised to 15 big blinds. You get the picture. This is pre-flop. I could do the same post-flop. I could be very, very face-up with what my hand is and what pot size I'm trying to get to. And the issue is that your opponent in poker is not your friend. If he knows what you're trying to do, he's not going to let you get there, right? If I immediately am honestly just shoveling chips to the exact pot size my hand wants, my opponent's either going to fold if he has a worse hand, or he's only going to go there with me if he has a hand that wants that pot size or larger. And that doesn't work well for me. So there is an element of deception built into poker. And because of this element of deception, which is put on top of the element of what pot does my hand want, strategies get really, really complicated. But peel away the deception and everything is actually very simple. The way I view poker and the way we're going to study and play poker in this course is this. You look at your hand and you understand what pot size does my hand want. And this is dynamic. It's going to change from pre-flop to flop to turn to river as the board develops. Generally speaking, you have complete freedom to navigate to that pot size in any way you see fit, because your opponent also has a hand and he also has a personality. Maybe the best way to get to a really big pot is to let your opponent do the betting. Maybe it's to check back and look weak and let him bluff. Maybe it's to be super direct. Maybe it's to make a small bet and then a larger bet, or 2 small bets. There are a million ways to do this, right? It's a back and forth game of I'm trying to navigate my car somewhere, but without you understanding what I'm trying to do. We're going to have in the back of our mind in every hand where we want to get to. And we're also going to focus a lot on our opponent and understand where he's trying to get to. And we're going to weigh those two things. And that's how we're going to make most of our decisions. And believe it or not, as long as you have those two concepts in mind, few more, but these are the main ones, you're almost already playing theoretically correct poker. You're not really blundering. Tough to blunder, to make a mistake that anyone can take advantage of when you're navigating your hands in the correct way and you're paying attention to your opponents. Principle number 2, and this is a really important one. Like I said, we're navigating somewhere with our hands, but there is also a context in poker, a storytelling context, a narrative context, and it's important to be aware of it as you're making decisions. If you guys ever hear commentators or watch poker strategy videos, you must hear people say phrases like, this is a good card for him, or this is a bad card for him, or this is a good board for him, or this looks really scary. And these are all talking about the story of poker. We're going to treat this at a very basic level. And as far as storytelling, we're going to look at who each card and each board is good for. And generally speaking, it's fairly straightforward, but sometimes it gets nuanced. But the general principle is High cards, good for the guy who has the betting lead, who has a tighter range, let's say, and low cards and connected cards and draw completing cards, good for the guy who has the looser range. I'm going to give you guys a few basic examples here. We'll drill this a bit later, but just so you get the big picture concept. If I raise the new call and board is ace, king, 9, high cards, disconnected, ace, king, 9, rainbow, amazing board for me. One of the best possible boards for me. Differently, if I raise the new call and the board comes 4, 5, 6 monotone, that's an amazing board for you. Why is this? There's an asymmetry between ranges. The guy who has the tighter range, his advantage is in hands like aces, kings, queens, ace, king, ace, queen, etc. Hence, high cards good for him. But as the board gets more connected and more suited and lower, these hands are just devalued. So if you think about 4, 5, 6 monotone, how big of a pot does aces want there? Not too big. And if that's your main pre-flop advantage hand, you don't have much of a pre-flop advantage anymore.